Anytime we gather in satsang, we look at the source of what causes conflict in our lives and thereby be free of it. The reason satsang is important is because it gives us direct communion with truth of who we are. See, throughout the week, we have different engagements of different kinds, whether at work or with family, relations, social obligations. All of this, which are all necessary, but it also takes us away from who we are unless we are very alert. Because the common condition of practically all humans is to imagine themselves to be a separate entity, a separate ego, a separate soul, whatever term one uses. If we look at the progress of all species themselves, if we look at all the animals, they clearly do not function with any such illusion of a center. And we don't ascribe to them either any center, any entity, any volition. For example, when a lion kills a gazelle, we do not think that the lion is bad because the lion chose to kill the gazelle. We naturally see that the lion acts out of its own instinct. There is no free will, there is no volition. It is just responding to instinct. There is hunger and it is conditioned biologically to hunt and eat, and that's what it does. Whereas animals that are herbivorous, they go and graze and so on. So all these activities in nature we see are happening in equilibrium. They are not necessarily harmonious, but they are in equilibrium. There is a natural equilibrium. But in that equilibrium, there is also a lot of apparent cruelty and what is called as survival of the fittest, and a lot of violence and so on. But humans, and before we go into humans, even babies are in the same way. So what's common between little babies and animals is again that the babies are acting out of instinct. We don't again ascribe any free will to a baby. We think clearly, we see clearly that they are simply acting on instincts. And they cry when they are hungry, they play, they smile, they do whatever they do. But humans, as we grow from out of being a baby into adolescents and then adults, we very clearly seem to develop a sense of self, a sense of a center as a me. And that center as a me, which is what we call the ego, and which is got many names to it. Sometimes we call it the mind, sometimes we call it the self, sometimes we call it the soul. As long as it is referring to the separate individual sense of existence, these names are practically synonymous. In religious terminology, all dualistic religions call it a soul, and in psychological terminology, it's called the ego. But it's practically pointing to the same notion of a center, of a entity who is seemingly persistent across time as the me. So somehow, even though no animal is ascribed this kind of a center, and that's why many religions even say animals don't have a soul, because they clearly see that animals are functioning on instinct. And but when we see the babies, we ignore that the babies also function without any center, but we condition them through culture, through all the various factors around them, to develop a sense of identity as the self. And this sense of self is what all religions dualistically refer to as soul, and then there is a lot of moral injunctions given for this soul: what should be done, what should not be done, what is right, what is wrong. And then the idea of cause and effect that leads to either a better next birth or heaven, depending on the religion and depending on the conditioning. So this is commonly seen as the nature of conditioning in all societies, all cultures, all religions. And it seems to be necessary because, as we saw, in the animal kingdom, there is a lot of apparent cruelty and violence. And if we function like animals, then we just look for survival and we act on instinct. The instinct can be to just inflict harm to the other person. And we see that, in fact, that's why we many times, when someone behaves in a very crude way, we say, don't be like an animal. Because we refer to someone functioning only on instinct, but without any kind of awareness of the instinct, as functioning like an animal. So the step of recognizing or imagining or assuming a center, a self, in the progress of religious evolution, or let's say even philosophical evolution, can be considered necessary, because that brings about some order to society, some level of harmony, rules, and so on. But then that also ultimately is not true, and therefore it creates a lot of suffering, because when we assume that there is a separate center here as a self, who is the source of all the actions and who is the experiencer of all the results of the actions, then this center, imagining itself to be traveling through time, through a process of becoming, always seems to be in a state of dissatisfaction, because all religions tell that this soul is imperfect, or sometimes it's even called as sinful, and one has to work and refine and someday attain perfection. And therefore there is a constant source of judgment, self-condemnation, criticism, and so on. So ironically, what happens is, instead of inflicting cruelty on others as animals do, we, because of this imagination of a center, inflict cruelty upon ourselves. We condemn ourselves while we act rationally outwardly in most cases, wherein we follow the rules, we go by the do's and don'ts of society, all of which is coming out of this idea of a center, a self, volition, free will, and so on. But this very imaginary center causes one to inflict cruelty upon oneself. One constantly condemns oneself as imperfect, sees oneself as a work in progress, and imagines a distant heaven or a distant enlightenment as the future goal, while striving, struggling, and thereby living in discontent. So, that is the current state of human affairs across all societies. We can see this clearly. There is no uh, dispute there, because no matter what society, no matter what culture, everyone seems to function with this imaginary center as the me. They think that I am the doer, I am the experiencer, and therefore they think this me, which is the soul, will suffer or enjoy the results of the actions and thereby get future reward or punishment and all the rest. So this kind of idea is there in every religion, every culture, predominantly speaking. But as we see, this causes suffering, and then it causes many other repercussions too, because the entity as a persistent self is imagined to be here. It always also feels to be limited naturally, because it is limited to this body, and the whole universe is out there, and I am just limited to this body as a center. And that very perception makes one feel very insecure, very fearful. There is the inherent fear of death, because the center is associated with the body. I imagine myself to be this body as me. So then the death of the body seems like a calamity, and one is afraid of the death of the body mortally. And as all psychologists point out, every fear stems from the fear of death itself, because it's so integral or so aligned with the notion of the self we carry as me. So when we have this fear of death and this insecurity that goes with it, then we want to fill that insecurity with stuff from outside. So we see ourselves as a limited entity, but we know that this is very finite. So we want to have ideas of what can be transcending this limitation. So we want to belong to some group. We identify with a nation, we identify with a religion, we identify with an ideology, and in that process we create division of us versus them, because any identity is secure only when the other identities are denied. So it results in conflict in society, in religious wars, in divisions. We want to belong to any group of people, and therefore when we don't feel belonging, we feel loneliness, because we are associated with this small center as a me, which is very finite and limited, and therefore it feels very terribly lonely when left alone, not able to be with itself, because naturally it's very isolating to be just this body as the center, as the me. So many problems come forth naturally because of this sense of self as the body, as the me. So we move away not out of any choice, but naturally we have moved away from the way animals live, where it's purely instinctual without any center. So that's why animals don't have any of the suffering. Little babies don't have any of the suffering because they don't have any need to belong to anything. They don't have any ideology. They don't have any idea of heaven or hell because they just don't have the sense of a center as a self. So they live instinctually and there is a certain freedom there. But we cannot go back to that because, first, as we said, that is an unconscious and therefore violence, cruelty, and chaos ridden way of living. It's the law of the jungle, we can say, where the strong overpowers the weak, and there is just the instincts that are overpowering, and there is an innocence there, but that innocence is also not harmonious, as we can see. That's why we cannot leave a baby to itself, because the baby does not even know to take care of his or her body. So we cannot go back to this innocent state. Many times, in fact, people, that's why when we crawl back into our own cocoon, there is a subconscious desire to go back into the womb, as it were, as some psychologists say, because that state of unconscious innocence seems better than this conscious state of suffering. But we first cannot go back to that because it is the process of evolution itself that has transcended that and brought this state of humanity, wherein there is the sense of self and center. So every baby, as we know, develops this sense of self-consciousness or center or soul or idea of a soul or me without any choice. It's not that there is a volition involved in this coming about. It happens by nature itself. So it is law of nature. In fact, it is divine law that everyone grows into this way of living. But as we saw, this is a highly dissatisfying way of living as well. But we cannot go back to the instinctual way of living. So then what is the way out? That is the pointer of non-duality. The true pointer is, first of all, that truth will set us free. So we don't have to do anything but inquire into the nature of truth itself, and that will set us free. And that requires us to look within whether this imagination of a center as a separate self is true or not. When we look carefully, and that is the inquiry of who am I? Because now that we have imagined ourselves to be a center, a self, this I, as we said, all the things about loneliness and fear and insecurity and wanting to belong, all of this comes about from this idea of the false me, which is a natural consequence of the imagination of the false me, which is not a mental imagination, but it's almost biological because everyone feels it. So the pointer of non-duality is to question that center. It is not to give any theory of oneness, because that theory of oneness can again be taken by this false center as me, as a goal to be achieved in time. So one can start studying about it and then belonging to a group now called, let's say, Advaita, which is then no different from belonging to any group, and looking for an identity through that group belonging, and so on. So that is not going to set us free, but that's only going to bring about the same illusion in a different form. So what is pointed to here is that we are going to look into whether the assumption of this false center is true or not. So if we look within, we clearly see that there are physical processes, there is thoughts, there is feelings, there is emotions, there is all kinds of various sensations. All of this is there. But this imagination that there is a persistent center that is there as a me, that's the only thing we need to look whether it's true or not. If we take a simple act of seeing itself, we imagine that I am seeing something because the language is structured in such a way that we say, I see this pen. But actually, I don't see this pen, the seeing of the pen happens. The pen is in front of my eyes, the eyes get the light from the pen, the image is recognized in the brain, and thereby there is a recognition that there is a pen. All of this is translated by the brain to say, I see this pen. Now, this is a very small example, but this is essentially the same process that happens with every action, every perception. When we look at anything or when we do anything, we imagine that I am doing it. But the important pointer here is to look carefully and question whether it's true. Not accept or deny anything, not believe in anything, because non-duality is not something to be believed in. It's something to be inquired and recognized as the truth of being itself. So when I look within and see any action, just like perception, if any action comes about, again, in every action, there is a lot of factors involved in action. There is the energy in the body, which is the life force that is making actions happen. There is the limbs in the body that is functioning. There is the memory that is necessary for functioning to happen. There is all this faculty that is working in harmony, and there is a sense of agency that comes forth, which determines what the action ought to be. And all of this together makes the action happen. And this entire process is then recorded by the brain as I did it. When in reality, the verbal expression I did it is only a post-facto recording of what happened organically as a process. The whole process of action happens, and post-facto it is recorded as my action, I did it. So in this way, subconsciously, right from childhood, we are conditioned by society and by various inputs to take ownership of our perceptions, to take ownership of our actions, and thereby build this center called the persistent self. This is the state of everyone. Everyone is going through the same experience, and therefore it seems very relatable. And then when a religious doctrine comes along and says, you are the soul, and that soul is journeying through time, and that soul will get liberation one day or heaven one day, all of that seems so rational and believable, because I am assuming that there is a self here which is tying together all these actions and perceptions into one entity. That core misapprehension is at the root of all suffering, and is the only thing that sustains all religious doctrines, dualities, and all kinds of philosophies. Whereas the direct pointer of non-duality, which is not a religion at all, therefore, because there is no belonging here. Though the word religion is interesting, because the word religion in reality, I was told the Greek word religion means going back to the source. So in that sense, you could say it is connecting to the true source. In that sense, it's a religion, but not in the sense of religious identity as it's used in society. So true non-duality is therefore looking at the very process of living itself and inquiring whether there is a separate center here as me. Who is this me that is presumably seeing, hearing, thinking, speaking, and so on? And when we ask this question, that is the essence of satsang. True satsang is to come upon this question. Because as we began, when we go to various gatherings, family, relations, work, everywhere it is egos talking to egos, right? So there is one, everyone imagines to be an ego as a self, as a center, and it seems very natural to think there is somebody sitting inside this body, and therefore there is somebody sitting inside that body, and so I am judging him, I am making an image of her, I am comparing him with someone else, I am condemning, I am liking, disliking. All of these movements are happening because of this imagination that there is a persistent entity called I or me. And that's what happens in all gatherings. We go to work, we go to parties, this and that. So satsang is the only place, true satsang. In fact, satsang literally means truth. So sat is truth. So satsang means coming in touch with truth is satsang. Many times people use this word to only further identification with a particular belief system or whatever. But in true essence, satsang means coming in touch with truth. And that is to question whether there is a center, and thereby come upon the truth of what is. When we look into this question of is there a center, is there a me, as we just slowly walk through, we recognize then that this whole idea of a center as a me is only a thought projected illusion. It seems so strong in our conditioning because we have never questioned it. We have never looked into this, and we have assumed that this is true, and everyone around confirms it. When we go to a movie, the movies confirm it through the stories they have. When we go to a sports event, for example, people are all conditioned in that way, identified and getting excited about one versus the other, without watching sport as just sport for the fun of it. There are those who watch it with a strong sense of identity, and there are even many events of violence. All this happens because everywhere we go, the sense of me is reinforced, and therefore It seems very natural to assume, and then we go to even a religious gathering, there also it is enforced or reinforced. So, what is the true essence of satsang is to question that. It is not to even say that it's false or true, but to question, to ask, who is this I? And that's the essence of the question, who am I? It is not to find out an answer, but it is just to ask the question, and whether this sense of me stands the test of scrutiny, test of inquiry. That's the only thing we have to look into. And when we look into that carefully for the first time, in many cases, we recognize that there is only an assumption made by our conditioning, but in reality, there is only what can be called as a process. See, one of the reasons why we always think there is somebody here is because there is always something going on. There is seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching going on when the eyes are open and the senses are open. There is thinking going on of some kind. There is the intellect functioning. And beyond all that, there is a sense of agency. That sense of agency is saying what to do, what not to do. Should I eat this or should I not eat this? Should I go here? Should I go to satsang? Should I not go? All of these, there is this. So all of these are functioning at any given time. And so we think that therefore there is somebody here as a persistent entity, because there is always something going on whenever we are awake. When we are in deep sleep, nothing is going on. But the moment we are awake, there's something going on. But what we miss here is that what's going on is a dynamic process. It is not a persistent entity that is here from yesterday to today, but it is a constantly dynamic and evolving process that's here. The body itself is not fixed even for one moment. As science tells us, every cell is changing. The whole body is literally changing. That's why we obviously don't see the change 1 second to another second, but we see a photo from 1 year to the next year, we see the change. So there is not even a fixed body here. It's changing constantly. The mind is changing constantly. When we say the mind, the collection of thoughts, there is nothing called mind but just a collection of thoughts. And the collection of thoughts is constantly changing. We may have certain set of thoughts when we were 25, and we may have a completely different collection of thoughts at 50, and that's with age and then with time. That is to say, we may have a certain set of thoughts at work, certain set of thoughts at home. We may have a certain set of thoughts vis-a-vis one relation and another relation. So there is no fixed entity called mind except collection of thoughts which are constantly changing too. The sense of agency again is also a function of where we are. At any given point, we may have a decision to make on, as we said, whether to go to satsang or whether to eat this particular food or whether to read this book or whatever it is. There is always a sense of agency that's also coming up constantly. And this also is constantly evolving. It's not that there is a fixed sense of agency here. It is a product of knowledge, memory, conditioning that is coming up as agency. So what we are doing is we are superimposing on top of all this subconsciously an image as a me, which is only a fiction, because in reality actually we don't function that way. It is not that we actually ever remain static. We are constantly dynamically evolving each moment as this body, as thoughts, as intellect. There is nothing static in this world. Everything is dynamic. And that is the principle of, by the way, the Divine Mother, as we call it, the feminine principle. That which is the base, the ground of it, is never in the realm of phenomena. One can never know it as an object. What is called as pure beingness, pure consciousness, is what we can call as Shiva. For instance, in that particular symbolism, cannot be known by thought, cannot be ever experienced, but is only what is. And that comes about as this dynamic expression of becoming. So being and becoming are actually one and the same. That's why religious iconography also says Shiva and Shakti are one and the same. This becoming is constantly, every moment, moving with dynamism. In fact, there is a beautiful quote by, interestingly, by Nagarjuna, who is a Buddhist philosopher, who said there is no such thing as impermanence because nothing comes into being to even be impermanent. We think generally that things are impermanent, but even that is not an accurate statement, because what is impermanent? There is nothing that ever stays fixed for even one moment to say that's impermanent. It's like the water of a river. Before we put our foot in the water has moved already. There is not a single moment where the water is fixed. So it's a constant dynamic process which is becoming, which is constantly moving, which is evolving. And that constant dynamic process of movement, evolution, is what we call as this energy or this Shakti, which is all pervading. And that is what expresses as the body, as the thoughts, as memory, as the sense of agency, everything that there is. So when we come to this recognition, then we neither are caught in the unconscious instinctual way of living of animals, nor in the conscious but ultimately false, self-centered way of living as seen in society largely, but we transcend both to be free of any sense of me, but let the movement of this divine energy express itself. Then all that is here each moment is only the expression of the divine. So in that clarity, then when we see anyone, we don't see then anymore a specific entity there, but only an expression of the same divine energy. The very divine energy that is expressing as this body and mind is expressing itself as all the bodies, all the entities, all the animals, everything that's there. And whether those expressions are having the animalistic instinct, or whether they are caught in the image of the me as the center, which is the evolved but ultimately suffering prone way of living, or in the rare cases, those who are free of both and living free now, as an expression of the divine process. Regardless of whatever is there, everything is an expression of the same divine energy. It's the same divine energy that is acting with instincts as animals. It is the same divine energy that is assuming this false idea of a me and causing all the suffering. And it is the same divine energy that is awakening to this true wisdom of being free of both and letting the expression of itself flow without any obstruction. So when we recognize this, then that awakens unconditional love. As long as we are caught in the idea of a me, there can be no love. There can only be attachment. We are attached to my image, and I am attached to the image of my partner or my friend or my spouse or whatever it is. And when that image is disturbed, I am upset, all of that happens. So what I am then calling as love in that case is only attachment. I love, let's say I love my country, that's again an attachment to the idea of a country. Or whatever one, whether one loves a person or an ideology or a concept, all of this is only attachment to fortify this false sense of separation. But when that is removed and we see that all that is here is the divine process of becoming, which is an expression of being. So being and becoming are both inseparable ultimately. That is the symbolism of Shiva and Shakti as half and half. We have this beautiful Ardhanari symbolism that shows that becoming is integral and one with being. And when we recognize that, then we don't look upon this world with any condemnation. We don't look upon this world as something to be transcended. We don't project a future state of enlightenment or liberation or heaven or anything, because this very world right now is divine. That is the direct pointer of Advaita. This very moment is divine. What is here is only the divine expressing itself. Each process is divine. Every movement, every interaction, everything is expression of the same divine process of becoming. And that divine process of becoming is an expression of the being itself. So when we try to experience being as what is called as self-realization, we are still caught in the false idea of a center who wants to realize. And therefore, we are always finding it to be an elusive goal. But when we recognize that this idea of this me is the problem, then what is there is liberation. So that's why I think it was once someone asked Ramana Maharishi, all I want is moksha. And he said, if the I and the want go away, moksha is already here. So that's the essential point, is that as long as I want moksha, moksha seems unattainable. But when the I and the want go away, then there is moksha here and now. So the subtle but important pointer with all of this is that many times when even non-duality is presented, it is presented as somehow transcending Maya and condemning this world as somehow unreal, and therefore one has to escape this world in some sense, either literally or inwardly. And all of this causes duality and conflict. But the direct pointer is that this very world is divine. There is nobody here other than the divine. This is the exact pointer that's given by Krishna in both the Gita and in Bhagavatam, where he says that just recognize that everything here is me. So that recognition that the divine alone pervades every cell, every atom, every process, every activity, and therefore an awakening of unconditional love is true freedom for nobody. That is the most important thing. It is not that I am free. There is no center, no self, no me here to be free. There is only freedom when there is the heaviness of the me goes away. That freedom is the freedom of being itself, which is constantly becoming as well. The false interloper between being and becoming is the me. When that me goes away, being and becoming both dance together harmoniously, and everything is perfect as it is, and there is only love and total attention that comes out of that clarity of perception, which is the true awakening of wisdom. That is why it is said that when one has the vision of wisdom, the whole world is seen as divine. So to see the world as divine is the true awakening of wisdom. As long as we see the world as separate, it is then false. But when we see the world as one with the divine, as non-different from the divine, then the world is as it is, and everything goes as it is. The body functions as it is, and every activity goes on without any separation of the center of the me, and therefore without any anxiety, worry, fear. There is a total sense of what can be then called surrender. It is again not surrender done by anyone. It is surrender without anyone surrendering. Just a flow of the river happening on its own, the very flow that is going unimpeded, every moment unfolding with great wonder, each moment a miracle, each movement a wonder, and that awakening is the pointer of satsang. The beautiful thing here is that there is no doing involved in the sense of any kind of practice or any kind of repetition of anything, because all that can only be for the center, the false me. As long as I take myself to be the me who is the separative self or individual, only then it can take on any practice of any kind. All kinds of practices are given, and they have their place in perhaps harmonizing the energy. For example, observing the breath, or taking a sacred name, All of this can be helpful in some limited way, but they are all ultimately only for the separative self. But true self inquiry, which is also true surrender, is not practice at all. It is a direct perception, insight into what is. And it requires only one important faculty, which is alertness. If we are not alert, then the habit, what is called as vasana or whatever term we use, will take over and project this false sense of me with its image and say I have to, even in the realm of spiritual realization, it will say, the voice will come in the head and say, oh, all this is fine, but I need to practice and I need to study more and I need to learn more. And sometimes in the limit, I may say, I may not even get it this lifetime, I'll get it next lifetime. All of this imagination will come from the voice in the head if we are not alert. So, and they will seem, one will believe in that, and that is to move away from satsang. That is to believe in the false voice. The voice in the head is asat. It is the mind which is asat. So it is not satsang anymore, it is asatsang. When we believe in that voice in the head and say, therefore, that I need more time, more practice, more this, more that, the direct pointer is all that is here is divine. As the beautiful expression Mahavakya goes, well, every Mahavakya points to the same thing, but one nice one is Sarvam Kalvidam Brahman. Everything here is Brahman. Tattvamasi also says the same thing. That alone is. Whatever expresses as you is that. Right now. Asi in Sanskrit means present. Right? The grammar of Asi means you are that in English. It is not that you will become that. In fact, the right translation is not even you are that, it is that you are. Tat Tvam Asi, that you are. So that alone is. It is not that there is a you who is that. It is that which appears as you and me. So that truth alone is. And to be alert and not get caught in the fiction of the separate me is self-inquiry, and it is surrender. To recognize that divine alone is, each moment is surrender. To see the divine in everyone, everything, every moment is surrender. And that requires alertness. Not getting caught in the idea of me who will gain something one day. But right now, right here, all that is there is only the divine. To awaken to that requires alertness, and it brings forth its own love and energy. And the beauty is, like anything else, how we have this rockets which have escape velocity, and then after they hit escape velocity they don't need any fuel, they go on their own. Similarly, when we are alert and we live this way, at some point there is an escape velocity wherein the very love of being becomes its own energy. and we can just live in that bliss of and that peace of being. Yeah, so I think the comment is whether being alert is a practice, and it was answered already that it's not a practice, it's just again, the word practice, all of these are just words. If you call it a practice, some people may call it whatever they call it, but the thing is, being alert is just being awake, that's all. See, we are outwardly we are awake, right? Our eyes are open, we are not dreaming. See, when we close our eyes, we are dreaming, in sleep, let's say. We imagine a false character, some imaginary character, all that happens. And then we awaken from it, and then we say, oh, that was just a dream, right? So when we awake, we stop dreaming, right? But when our eyes are awake, we are still inwardly dreaming. That's what is the other kind of sleep. So to be awake truly within also is being alert. So is being awake a practice? It's not a practice, but it's just being awake. All transactions in the world involve ego. See, all transactions in the world involve various sense of agency, right? But we just pointed out that we mistake it to be ego. The word ego in English means a psychological self, right? In Sanskrit also we have a similar word which is ahankara, right? The I sense. So this, or ahambhava, we can say. Ahambhava, many words, similar expressions. So that's why Krishna in the 18th chapter, he says, the one with the right sense of agency is na ahamvadi, he says. See, normally when we do something, we think I am doing it, right? The sense of entity as a me is doing it. And that is the mode of tamas and rajas. But Krishna says, when he describes the three ways of various things, sattva, rajas and tamas, of various things, one of the things he comes to is even this very question of sense of agency, action. And he says the one who acts without the sense of I is acting with sattvic agency, na ahamvadi, which means there is agency of action, but it is not imagined to be a persistent me. See, when we come to satsang, for example, if we take that example, you say, I want to go to satsang today. There is a sense of agency there, right? A decision making. But that agency is only for that moment, right? That agency is a function of the conditioning of that moment. There is no persistent self, which is the same self that decided yesterday what to eat for breakfast, right? It's a process. There is no fixed entity. That's the whole point. Ego means a fixed entity, right? I am here. I was the one who like you. That's why we get hurt, we get all that, right? You tell me something today, and I am remembering it 10 years later because you told me that day, 10 years back. That is the ego, right? That is thinking that it's a fixed entity, carrying the image of that fixed entity, and carrying the hurt and the insult and the praise and the flattery, all of that, and thereby creating suffering. Whereas the sense of agency as I comes up every moment, fresh. actually. So we use the word I naturally, right? We say, I want to, as I said, I am going to satsang today, or I am, but that I is a process, right? It is the decision making that happens as a result of the conditioning and the set of inputs and everything that is there in that moment. It's like a river that's flowing. It makes the decision, and that I is gone with that. Then you see it's a very simple but beautiful thing to see that, right? That what I call as I is a process. We think, see, this was the beautiful insight of Buddha too, right? Buddha said there is no entity, there is only events. Like he put it nicely, there is doing, no doer thereof. There is thinking, no thinker thereof. There is speaking, no speaker thereof. That is the essence of the whole thing, right? Is that each moment there is doing, and the doing seems to have a doer, right? But the doer is part of the doing. See what I'm saying? The doer and the doing are one movement, and it is done with that movement, right? Like this evening, if something else comes, the next moment something else comes, there is again a process of movement, right? Agency, everything comes up. So there is nothing fixed from one moment to next moment, even let alone one day to next day. The body is changing, thoughts are changing, ideas are changing, everything is changing, and the decision making is changing. You may feel like coming to satsang this time, not come next time, because there's a completely different circumstances, completely different various things are going on, right? There is nothing fixed except this false imagination that there is a fixed entity, that as a soul, as a center, as self, whatever we call it. There is a source of confusion. Many times, even like people look at Buddha said anatma, right? He called it, he used the Pali word, anatta, I think. Atma changes to something like that, So he said there is no self. And many people think, oh, Buddha denies. What he denied is exactly the same as what Advaita says too, which is that no separate jiva. So it says, what is the famous statement which says, Jivo Brahmaiva na aparaha, right? That's what Shankara says. Brahmam Satyam Jagat Mithya Jivo Brahmaiva na aparaha. So he says there is no Jiva. Jiva is Brahman, which is exactly what the Buddha said in a different language, that there is no separate self. There is only the infinite. Brahman means infinite, or all-pervading. Or see, the word Brahman comes from the root of Brahat, which means humongous, right? Infinite. That's the root meaning of the word Brahman. That which is infinite. We again make it into a concept, right? Brahman is not anywhere; it's here. It's the infinite. What is here now? It's the infinite, right? It is the infinite that is appearing as matter. That's what we discussed briefly too. Matter is spirit. It is everything here is the infinite. So there is no separate self even now, but that's the imagination we have, right? That I am a center, a self. Then the whole story gets built on it, right? That I have to attain liberation, or some other religion will say you will go to heaven, you will go to hell. All of that is for the fiction. It's a fictitious me that is at the root of all such dualistic religions. And to recognize that it's a fiction is freedom. Then all that is here is divine. That's it, right? And that doesn't mean that you stop acting. Many people think, in fact, you act most dynamically, right? Because there is nothing holding you back as all of this, right? There is just this divine vision, and the divine agency comes up within. You eat correctly, you may exercise, everything can go on, right? When I am exercising, there is the exercise, the agency to exercise. And when you're eating healthy, there is an agency to eat healthy, right? It's dynamic. It keeps on going, right? It doesn't stop with, and it's a beautiful flow. And then there is nobody here. It's just that. And then there is no fear of anything, right? There is no fear of anything because it just goes on, You just respond to what is this moment. And, whatever comes after that. See, that's the whole essence of also saying not worry about the result, but do the action. That's all it is, right? Just do what is. All pointers are basically the same, essentially. When we say karma yoga, it's the same thing. Just do what is now, and that's it.
So are you distinguishing the ego from the moment to moment rising of...
Yes, exactly, right?
I thought they are the same.
No, the ego means something that is persisting across time.
Across time.
See, for example...
But is that ego really persisting, or we have an illusion of that persisting?
Exactly. That's it. That's it. That's all it is. There is no persisting ego.
Correct.
We have an illusion that it persists. So this is exactly why Ramana Maharshi in Ulladu Naarpadu or many places says, if you look for it, it takes a run. Otam pidikum, he says.
Right.
See, the moment you look, where is this ego? It's not there. It's an illusion, that's all. Actually, there is only the dynamic process, as we said, right? The dynamic agency of doing is there, that's why the doing is the doer. There is no, it's one movement, right? Action, decision making, doing, everything is one movement. And then the next, there is a different action with its own agency and all of that. Now, this illusion that there is a persistent ego is what creates all the suffering. See, for instance, if you, as I said earlier, right, if you tell me that what you said is stupid, just to take an example, right? I mean, you are referring to, let's say, the action now, but I am taking it to be a comment on a fixed entity here, right? So tomorrow, or even sometimes in many cases it happens 10 years later, you come and I say, oh, you told me that I'm stupid, and how dare you say that, or all this comes because it doesn't get washed away, right? That illusion holds on to everything. So we build an image, and that image thinks I am a persistent entity, ego. That's the ego. And that ego is what is also sometimes called as this idea of in religious terms, a separate soul, right? Jiva, whatever term we use. And then that is said to have sin, and it has to journey through this and that. All the baggage comes from that, right? So that's why the question is there anyone now? Find out, right? That's what Ramana Maharshi would always say. When even people ask about next life or past life, he would say, is there anyone there now living this life? Find out.
Right.
There is only the dynamic process of living. There is nobody living, right? The body is there. So in fact, the better expression is not nobody living, but the body is living, but there is no one inside the body living. It's just the living, right? And that living is divine expression. It happens, every cell is functioning by this divine energy, right? And so all these actions are all happening, words are coming out, everyone has different vibhutis. That's what Krishna points in one chapter of Gita too, right? Someone speaks well, someone dances well. Everything is a vibhuti of the divine, right? There is nobody who can say I am good at anything, because there is no separate owner of any faculty, right? All faculties are expression of the divine. That's the whole principle of vibhuti of that chapter, right? He says whatever is great in anything, Krishna says it's the divine. So that can be applied to any vibhuti, anything, right? So there is no, so when we recognize this, then there is nothing, the essence of all of this is then you don't register anything psychologically, right? Memory is necessary for registering functional aspects of living. Where is Bellevue Library, how to come there, all this needs memory, time, this, that, right? But to record psychologically that, oh, you said that day and I don't like it, and this, all this registration, because of the illusion of the me. And that illusion of the me is the idea which is, when looked at, goes away, right? There are many examples given for this, right? That it's like a ghost. Another verse in Ulladhanarpada, Ramana Maharshi says it's like a ghost, the ghost always clings on to something, but when you look separately where it is, it's not there, right?
It seems like a game.
Yeah, it's really a game, right? But when you awaken to that, it's so easy, right? It's just, see, the very awakening to this recognition is great relief. There's no one here. There is only the divine, and there is no one there too, right? So then it's beautiful. So when I look at you, there is no sense of otherness there. There's a beautiful quote which so pithy, and it became a meme, like, I got this also, which is so lovely, where somebody asked Ramana Maharshi, how do you treat others? That's the beautiful answer. See, normally people will say this, that, and the other. He simply said, there are no others. That was the answer, right? Such a perfect answer to that question. Because there are no others. There is only the divine energy, which is appearing as everything that there is, right? And so that is the awakening of love, right? Then there is such relief, right? You don't have to practice anything. You don't have to learn anything new. You don't have to understand anything. It's just all that is here is divine. That's it. And life goes on. As we said, right, all decisions happen, what you want to eat, what you want to work, what you want to do, all that goes on, based on what is right. And then if someone is willing to listen, you tell them, even in those realms, right, you can tell people, hey, eat right, or do this or do that, whatever, right? But beyond that, there is nothing that bothers anymore. Right?
We can.
So the question is, on the one hand, it's very simple to see that all we need to do is to be alert and not get caught in this false idea of a persistent self. But on the other hand, many Vedantic texts talk a lot about this apparent false center, right?
Right.
You're talking about things like, can you give examples of the kinds of things the Prakarana Granthas talk about? Like,
it starts with certain, you have to do sadhana, you have to have these qualities, viveka, vairagya, shama.
Okay, got it. So the question is, many of these Vedantic texts talk about developing various qualities, such as viveka, vairagya, shama, dama, and then purity and all that. See, there's two ways to look at it, right? One is that sometimes many of these are given for the mind which is asking for questions. See, for example, when Ramana Maharshi was asked about all of these things, he would always say that they always make it complicated what is so simple, right? That's what he would say. What is very simple is sometimes unnecessarily complicated, and this happens in all. For example, not that I have studied much of this, but if you take Buddhism, what Buddha pointed is so simple, but they have created this humongous Buddhist canon of literature and so many vadas and volumes and volumes. So that's why somebody joked that they've written so much on shunya. But so that's what the mind does, and the same thing happens in the Vedantic world too. People write and write, and many times even Ramana Maharshi would say scholars come and ask him questions. The funny thing is, in fact, it was very vivid in the case of, like, there was Kavyakanta Ganapati Muni and Kapali Shastri, some Vedantic scholars who could just compose Sanskrit and all that. And they knew all of this, right? And they would want to discuss all this with Ramana Maharshi. And he would just ask them, find out who is asking these questions. And they would say, Bhagavan, please don't take the Brahmastra. Because that is what they don't like. The scholars love to engage in on and on and on debates about this Prakarana Grantha, that Prakarana Grantha, what is this saying, is it the Drishti Srishti Vada, Srishti Drishti Vada, this is that. The mind loves that, right? But the simple direct pointer of, is there anybody there right now who is the one asking the question? They say, please don't employ this Brahmastra, they would say. So that is the nature of the mind, is that it refuses to see the simplicity and always wants complex answers, right? So there is that. That is one aspect. The other aspect is that from a direct perspective, if you look at it, all those qualities you mentioned rather, are all not sequential, but they are a direct product or a direct effect of this clarity of seeing, right? So what is Viveka? Viveka means discernment, right? And discernment is possible only when there is no attachment, which is Vairagya. Vairagya means not being attached. And who is having Raga? Vairagya means opposite of Raga. Raga, its opposite is Vairagya. Who has Raga? Raga is there only for the ego. As long as there is an ego, there is Raga. The very definition of ego is Raga. So, how do we become Vairagi? By being only free of the ego, right? And then you look at Shama and Dhamma, all of these. So, another way to look at it is, every quality is not that it is a sequential thing, but it is like a circle. It reinforces itself, right? One example given, very nice example given is, see, if you have a wet wood and you want to make the wet wood burn, what you do is you expose it to fire. The fire doesn't burn the wood, but it dries the wood. And the same fire, once the wood is dry, burns the wood. So in both cases, the action was done by the same fire. So you could say the fire purified the wood, which is drying the wood, and then the fire burned the wood. But both was done by the same fire. So that fire is this wisdom. Inquiry.
Inquiry.
So the inquiry gives purity
Right.
and it dissolves the false self. So in that way, it is not that it's a sequential thing, though it may seem sequential, but it is the same jnanagni, we could say, the fire of wisdom, which when we first come to this, perhaps it may seem very abstract or something like that. So when we just ask this question, the question may not even connect. See, many people, like I know, I met once someone in India and they said, I just don't understand this, why my question, right? Like for them, it's like something that cannot, they are into religious practices and other things, but because sometimes it seems like a very abstract question or something, it's very easy to go read a book or to do something, all the other things.
Do something.
They're
not doing.
Exactly. Right? So, but it's okay because when you persistently stay with it, then that's what we could call as grace. It kind of reveals itself, right? It may be, and that's where there is difference in, there may be someone who hears it the first time and it burns immediately. And then for some it may take many decades before it burns, right? But you need that shraddha, right? That persisting with it. And so you could say that persistence is what is manifesting as all of these qualities, right? Viveka, Vairagya and all that. It's not that you could first cultivate Viveka separately and then cultivate Vairagya separately and then one day you go to Jnana, right? Never like that. It's all one circle. So that way you can see that it's like a positive feedback loop, you could say. One Viveka reinforces Vairagya, Vairagya reinforces Shama, Dhamma. It's like a circle. And that's
simultaneously
correct.
Integrating and
correct. See, the mind always, we think of things linearly. It's a straight line. But in this world, everything is a circle. See, like time is a circle, right? Like day and night, circle. Again and again repeats. Summer, fall, winter, spring. It's a circle. It repeats. Then larger cycle of time repeats, right? So everything is going round and round, actually. Planets going around the sun, exactly, all that, right? So it's all circular. And now there is this theory that even Big Bang is like a cycle. There is many Big Bangs, So even in this way, everything is it's a cycle. It's like a circle, It's not that we linearly go from Viveka to Vairagya or whatever, right? It's a circle. There was another question there, whether there is a fear of losing our identity. Someone said, if we go do this inquiry, there is a fear of losing our identity, right? Which is very true. The thing is, we have to see clearly that the identity is the source of all suffering, actually. Right? We think identity is some good thing to have, So the reason we have fear of losing identity is because we think we only fear losing something we value. As long as we value something, we fear losing it. But the moment we see that it's actually a source of suffering, then we instantly step away from it, right? So what is identity doing to us? Whatever identity, and the other important thing to notice is we are a collection of multiple identities, right? The ego is not even, that's why the ego is such a fictitious thing, because it's constantly, like, it seems like a fixed thing, but in reality it's always changing its shape. And one day you are identified with your nation, another day identified with religion, another day identified with being a man or woman or whatever. There are so many identities people are carrying, and every identity is a source of suffering, because the moment you are identified with your nation, then you see things in a divisive way, right? And then if something good happens to your nation, you are elated. Something bad happens, you are depressed. Same thing if you're identified with your gender, identified with your work, one day you get fired, then the whole thing is finished, right? You identified with your relationship, the relationship can end one day, and then you are suffering. So all of this causes us to recognize that identities are a source of suffering. So to be free of identity is freedom, actually, right? Then you are free to respond to what is from the intelligence of now, right? You're not identified by saying that I have to do something. I'll just see, even in very practical matters, it makes a difference, right? If I'm identified even at work, if I'm identified with a position, then I'm not welcoming new ideas. I'm fixed in my position, right? And if I'm identified with my religion, let's say, you don't see the blind spots that are there, right? You think my religion is great and other religions are all bad. The truth of the matter is, every religion has created different kinds of problems in this world. So when you recognize this, that then you transcend all religion and come upon the universal truth of being itself, right? Which is beyond all religions. Again, the word religion has to be understood correctly. We are talking of identification with a sectarian kind of notion of religion, right? See, for instance, if we think, even like we take Advaita, and we take Advaita is only the, let's say, what is the word for it, property of one religion, then it becomes a big problem, right? Because there are so many who have come upon this realization without this cultural background, and there are some who have not come to this realization.
Aaron, please come to the third floor. Your mom is waiting for you. Aaron, please come to the third floor.
So the point is that it's just, when you don't have any such identity, then you don't think one nation is better than the other. You just see people as they are, right? And then if someone awakens to this, that's wonderful. If someone doesn't awaken, then we look at them with compassion, and if they are open to it, we share it. Otherwise we don't, right? And so identity, holding on to any identity, is a source of suffering. That's all it is, right? See, that's why if you look at the true, even the ancient rishis, for example, of the Upanishadic times, they had a very universalist vision, right? They said, Sarve Janaha Sukhino Bhavantu. There was nothing sectarian ever said by any of them. It's just because the whole universe is an expression of the divine, and the universe, you want a world where everyone awakens to this wisdom, ideally, right? The reason all the great beings shared this truth at different times is out of compassion, right? Compassion for all humans. So it doesn't make any distinction between creeds and other nationalities and all the rest, right? Anyone can awaken to this, and there are people who have awakened to this from all backgrounds. Like even today we see, right, so many, like someone was telling me that in Tiruvannamalai, people from 150 countries come. But the important point, the answer to the question is, all identities are a source of suffering.
That is true.
That's all. And so when you are free of identity, so then there is no fear of losing identity. You are happy to lose identity. See what it's just so like when you are in this world as just nobody, it's so liberating, right?
Definitely, it's liberating.
Isn't it?
Yes, I
So-
could experiment and see, oh my God, this is such a freedom.
Such
In the
freedom,
office,
exactly.
You're told you're given a label and you're doing something, people don't recognize you or pull you down, or you want to do more. Everything you connect by identity
Yeah.
that you want to carry is
Correct.
a burden that we carry.
That's
It doesn't matter where you call me whatever. This is my knowledge and we have to do this.
There you
do
go.
the best we can.
That's it.
Forget about the rest of it. Right? That gives a lot of
Freedom, exactly. When you're free of identity, you're free, right? You're see, because that is the truth, right? We are all literally just nobody, right? There is just nothing here to hold on to anything. There is just whatever is just the expression of the divine. So
So happiness is inversely proportional to the number of identities you carry.
right, yeah.
The lesser
The comment is happiness is inversely proportional to the number of identities and also the intensity with which you carry the identities. The freer you are of identities, the happier you are. Exactly. And that's true with all, yeah, exactly, right? Like even in a field as supposedly rational as physics, there are stories of how certain insights were dismissed because of identities, right? Like someone had a good insight, but it was just not listened to because people did not, they were not open to it. And it took 30 years or 40 years for that idea to gain, visibility. So identity can play a corrosive role in all areas. So yeah, identity is just, why do we need to have any identity, right? I mean, there is just the functional and fluid identities are always there, there is, but they just are necessary for the needs of each moment, that's all. Like you go to the airport and you produce a passport, and that's because you need that identity for that moment, but you don't have to carry it inwardly as my identity, right? Same is true with every identity, right? There is just functional need for certain identities that can come and go, but there's nothing to hold on to. Yeah. So the question is, all prayers that are there, essentially, the only true highest prayer is to awaken to our true nature. That's the true prayer, because then we are free of this false idea of separation, and there is the response to what is, which is total, based on the intelligence of each moment. That's all. See, that's why, it doesn't mean that one therefore becomes specific or anything, There are moments when if there is a need to, for instance, engage in a battle, that happens too. That's what, for instance, Krishna taught Arjuna, right? But you can do that with compassion and with clarity and without a sense of ego. That was the whole pointer, right? That even something like that can be done without a sense of ego.
Right.
So Outer action can be then purely based on the need of what is necessary, and it is not dictated by any premeditated ideology. As long as inwardly there is no center, there is no false center, that is, there is no false self.